All right, so I keep hearing about this masculinity crisis or this male loneliness epidemic. Lots of problems happening with men in this day and age. And so, as a male, I want to make a couple reflections. First of all, I work with both men and women in KI. And to be perfectly honest with you, there's really not that much difference between the two when it comes to resolving emotional repression and suffering. You've got men and women who repress anger and who are compelled to show up as good people. And you've got men and women who repress hurt, grief, and sadness and who are compelled to show up as strong people. And the more people I work with, the better bird's eye view I get of sort of the percentages of anger repressors to hurt repressors. And it feels about 50-50. And bear in mind, when I'm talking about anger repressors and hurt repressors, I'm talking about what emotion someone primarily represses. Yeah, we all repress all of it, but usually there's one emotion that's buried deeper in the body that has sort of more fear around it. And in KI, we call this your dominant repression. And it's actually really important to know what your dominant repression is. We ask people to somatically test and figure it out early on in the process, and here's why. If we don't, we will bamboozle ourselves out of our authenticity by landing on ideals. Let me give you two examples using men as the subject. When we bury what's true, we're forced to identify with what's false. So men who repress their anger, instead of resolving their anger repression, which would drop them more deeply into their authenticity, tend to land on ideals like sensitivity, compassion, kindness as an avoidance strategy. And this is anger repressors' MO, yeah? To bury their anger and pretend that they're the opposite of anger. And the result is depression, anxiety, addiction, chronic pain, loneliness, suffering. And this is one half of the so-called male loneliness epidemic or the masculinity crisis that we currently find ourselves in. And the reason that I say so-called or use quote fingers is because of two things. One, it's not a masculinity crisis or epidemic, it's an emotional repression crisis and epidemic. And two, like I said earlier, it's not limited to men. Women deal with the same issues when it comes to anger repression. Now, the other half of the alleged masculinity crisis or male loneliness epidemic is this. When we bury what's true, we're forced to identify with what's false. So when men bury their hurt, grief, and sadness deep in their bodies in childhood, instead of clearing the body of their buried, repressed hurt, grief, and sadness, will often land on ideals like strength, power, and honesty as a way to avoid resolving their emotional repression and thus becoming their authentic selves. And this is a hurt repressor's MO, to bury their vulnerability and pretend they're the opposite. It's the root of suffering, regardless of your gender and regardless of your repression type. But what happens is kind of both sad and hilarious to witness. You see both repression types shadow boxing and going at it with each other. The anger repressors, who can't get angry, point at the hurt and vulnerability repressors who can get angry and say, that's a masculinity crisis. Yeah, that's toxic masculinity. And the hurt and vulnerability repressors who can't allow themselves to be hurt or vulnerable point at the anger repressors who can allow themselves to be hurt and vulnerable and go, well, that's the real masculinity crisis, right? Those are boys. They need to grow up and be men. It's shadow boxing. If I'm not allowed to feel it, then neither are you. And that's happening on both sides. And you can probably see the political implications of this too. I'm going to try to say this really clearly and directly. Masculine, feminine, liberal, and conservative are all hiding places for buried, repressed emotions. They're not real. Check with a young child, right? They're too busy being themselves, feeling and expressing what's true, the full range of human emotions. Until they start repressing their emotions to get their needs met, pretending to be good or strong as the case may be, and suffering with the rest of the adults. This is the process that we reverse engineer in KI. If you'd like to give it a shot, then tap the link in the caption of the bio.